morning and welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And I'll bet you're all just like me anxious to get started back in this book. This is a very informative book. Incredibly informative, and it tells us what is really going on in this country today. The example that we're reading about here in this book, Rome and Civil Liberty by James A. Wiley, is virtual mirror image of what Rome is doing in this country. Now, yesterday we concluded with our discussion about how the Roman Catholics of Britain put the guilt trip on the British Parliament for maintaining in its books, in its law books, the anti-papal laws. Now remember, the anti-papal laws were simply put in place to protect the government of England from papal tyranny. It was a means of preserving the government because the papacy constantly tried to overthrow it. And the atrocities, for one attempt was the literal destruction of the British Parliament. 36 kegs of dynamite loaded in the basement. It was called the gunpowder plot of 1605. Rome meant business, big business, and they were willing to blow up the entire Parliament in order to overthrow the government. Assassination attempts upon the crown. It was a constant war that England was fighting to defend her independence and her Protestantism and her Protestant liberties from papal aggression. Now here is another case, even after all of that England is now once again under assault from the papacy, trying to overthrow the legitimate Protestant government of Great Britain. And succumbing to the guilt trip laid upon them by the Roman Catholics of Britain, England, in a spirit of goodwill, obviously, rescinded some of those anti-papal laws, and the most important of which was to rescind the law that prohibited the Pope from issuing edicts in the form of bulls and encyclicals and papal letters and pastoral letters and that sort of thing to the British Catholics, because they take the form of legislation. Those papal documents are the literal commandments from their God in Rome. That is a usurpation of the government. And immediately after those laws were rescinded, the papacy did what it always does, what it can virtually be expected to do. When the doors are thrown open to the papacy, he comes charging in as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and immediately begins to set up his government. That's exactly what happened in Great Britain. And not only did he come in and set up his government, but he did it in a most provocative way. They chose the site of the very seat of the papal government to be Westminster. All right? Westminster was going to be the archdiocese. The diocesan structure of England was beginning to be developed. They appointed an archbishop over Westminster, and then 12 bishops to occupy and to govern the rest of England in other dioceses. Okay? This is how the government is established. A hierarchy in Westminster who oversees all the other bishops in England, each of whom occupy their own territories. It's as described in the book The Vatican Billions by Averell Manhattan as the shadow government. But Rome would be offended that it was ever called a shadow government. It is the predominant government. It is the divine government. It is the extension of the seat of Peter in Rome. And it is the primary government. As a matter of fact, we'll see words as we continue reading here that once this government was established, the decree went forth that anyone who does not assent to this new government, this new papal government headed up by the Archbishop, and underneath him all the other bishops, is to be rendered null and void, of no effect. So this is a hostile takeover of the government of England at the moment these laws were rescinded. Now, he begins next to the last paragraph on page 33, if you're following along in your own copy of the book. It says, the selection of Westminster as the seat of the government, that is the papal government, of the new cardinal, had an arrogant and offensive look. Okay? It was an outrage that they chose Westminster. It says, Westminster is the spot of all others most associated with the glories of our past history. Within its time-honored precincts are the tombs of our kings, the monuments of our statesmen, the trophies of our warriors. There our parliament sits, and our courts administer justice. It had never been a bishopric in papal times, but simply a monastery. But the offense lay not in that this act disturbed the cherished associations of the nation, but in that it encroached upon the country's independence. It bore the character not of an ecclesiastical arrangement, a church arrangement, but of a temporal usurpation. That is, the usurpation or overthrow of the legitimate Protestant government of England. Rome strategically chose Westminster as an open sign to every Briton that Rome was now in control of all of Britain and all of her realms. Okay, the very site chosen was an outstanding sign of the usurpation of the temporal power, the legitimate temporal power of England. Now, semi-regal fates celebrated the event at Rome. The new owner of the purple held a levee in the Quirinal, the Princess Doria doing the honors. In other words, there was great jubilation in Rome, great celebration. Now, if this were an insignificant matter, what they had accomplished in Britain, there would have been no great celebration. But this was huge. Look, to use modern terms today, this was regime change in England. And not just regime change, but the papacy itself was setting up the government. So this was a big deal in Rome. Protestantism, Rome considers England to be one of the birthplaces of the Protestant Reformation, the most powerful of all the Protestant countries. And it was a tremendous victory for Rome to be allowed to set up the papal government. So there was great celebration, regal fetes, in other words, regal festivities were celebrated when the event occurred at Rome. And it says the new owner of the purple, the new cardinal appointed for Westminster, the Archbishop, held a levee in the Quirinal. In other words, a grand reception, okay, in the Quirinal, that is the Quirinal Palace in Rome, the Princess Doria doing the honors. It says princess, ambassadors, consuls crowded the antechamber of the cardinal. They were really celebrating this man. And it says, after this, departing from Rome, not now as when a simple student, remember, when he was a student in the college at Rome that was established for English-speaking children, very highly selected children, of which this cardinal was one, who brought essentially Jesuit influence to Ireland and to England and even Scotland in preparation for the eventual overthrow of the Protestant government. This cardinal was virtually instrumental in the overthrow of the legitimate government, and that's why they made him a cardinal, and that's why they made him an archbishop. So you can see this is no small thing. And it says, after this, departing from Rome, not now as when a simple student, when he went to Rome to become a student for the overthrow, it says, but full of honors and charged with a great commission, he traveled by easy stages to England, and resting on his way at the despotic courts of Tuscany and Vienna, Roman Catholic powers of authority, he slowly approached our shores. Okay, this is from Rome's point of view, this cardinal is the representative of God on earth coming to Great Britain. Okay, I don't want to seem blasphemous to my listeners. I'm talking about Rome's view of all this. The Pope considers himself to be the God of this world, King of kings and Lord of lords. And he sent this cardinal to take possession of England. And these aren't figurative terms, these are literal terms. Now he says in the end of October, the cardinal and the bull, remember the papal bull that was sent with the cardinal to be read and published in England for the purpose of setting up this papal government, he says the cardinal and the bull appeared in England together. The document was immediately published. The ecclesiastical truculence of the bull was masked by an affluence of high-flown professors and tender solicitude for the, quote, the flock of the Lord in England, unquote. In other words, the language of the bull was flattering, okay, so as not to incite too much suspicion. But the language was written in such a way that the hierarchy of Britain would certainly understand the importance of it, as a hope of conveying the information to the legitimate government of England that this was a takeover, and to do it in such a way so as not to justify an angry response. Okay? This is the tact that Rome always takes when she exercises her aggression. If you are at all familiar with pastoral letters and papal bulls and everything, on the surface, if you don't know what the language is really saying, it seems very flowery, it seems very gracious, it seems very jubilant, and all of that. It's when you read carefully with understanding what is written in that bull, are you fully aware of its import and of the papacy's arrogance, unlimited arrogance, nothing less than you would expect from Satan himself. Okay? Now, don't be misled by the flowery language of a papal bull or a papal encyclical. The proof is in the pudding. Watch what Rome does after these bulls and encyclicals are read. Now, it says on the end of October, the cardinal and the bull appeared in England together. The document was immediately published. The essential truculence of the bull was masked. In other words, masked with flowery words. It was masked by an affluence of high-flown professions of tender solicitude for the flock of the Lord in England. Okay, sounds very harmless, but it's meant to harm, trust me. And it says, under the guise of the deepest spiritual humility, it aimed only at earthly power. In other words, after reading this bull for himself, James A. Wiley, with understanding, understood the import just as the legitimate government of England was supposed to interpret it. James A. Wiley tells us that in no uncertain terms, despite all the flowery and high-sounding language, it was a hostile takeover of the government. It aimed only at achieving earthly power. over England. And that's exactly what the papacy always does. It always aims at increasing its temporal realms. As King of Kings and of Lords, the object of the papacy is to conquer the whole world for the Pope. Now, the papacy can say they're conquering the whole world for Christ. But who is Christ in the Roman Catholic Church? The papacy, the self-styled vicar of Christ, which literally means the replacement of Christ. And in papal bulls and encyclicals, they've made no bones about it. When the Pope speaks, it is God who speaks. Okay? Now, in the bull, the pontiff, the Pope, informs us that having, quote, besought the assistance of the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, right there is the error of the Roman Catholic Church, and of the saints whose virtues have made England illustrious, unquote. Who has made England illustrious? Not Protestantism, but the dead saints of England. That's who is worshipped by the Roman Catholic Church. They pray to saints. The Bible forbids it. It's called necromancy. And this is the religion of the Roman Catholic Church. Mary, the Virgin Mary, is one of the saints to whom they beseech all their needs and blessings. And also, she is regarded in the Roman Catholic Church as the Mother of God. In other words, they acknowledge that she is the mother of Jesus, but not only that, she is the Mother of God. All right? She is higher than Jesus. And this is the fallacy of the Roman Catholic Church. But nonetheless, in this bull, the papacy makes great pains to honor the blasphemies of the Roman Catholic Church. And it says, in the bull, it says, quote, besought the assistance of the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, and of the saints whose virtues have made England illustrious. To be enabled to help us, he now, in virtue of the plenitude of his apostolic power, entrusted to him by our Lord Jesus Christ, through the person of St. Peter, Prince of the Apostles, decreed the reestablishment in the kingdom of England, and according to the the common laws of the Roman Catholic Church, of a hierarchy of bishops deriving their titles from their own sees, unquote. So the papacy has credited all of heaven for bringing this this overthrow of the Protestant government through the papacy, through St. Peter, Prince of the Apostles. This is also blasphemy. It's based on the Roman Catholic belief that Peter is the rock and foundation of the church rather than Jesus. And it established in England the hierarchy, the papal hierarchy. All right, as inoffensive as this language may seem to some, this is an abject, outright assault and usurpation of the legitimate government. The target of all of this is Protestantism. There's no personal beef with the Queen. There's no personal beef with the Parliament. Their personal beef, the beef that the papacy always has, is against Protestantism. Protestantism rejects the authority of the papacy lock, stock, and barrel, just as we would reject Antichrist ruling over us, just as we would reject Satan ruling over us himself. So it's the attack on Protestantism that is the root and foundation of all of these activities. Now it says the bull went on to partition England, in other words, to divide up all of its territory into territorial dioceses. Okay? The diocese is the basic element of papal government. If your land, no matter where you live, and I'm not speaking only to Americans, if your land is divided up into dioceses and archdioceses, That is the papal government. And to the extent that it has power, it rules over the visible government of the country. Its very purpose is to extend the temporal authority of the Pope to every stitch of your land. That is the purpose of every bishop and every archbishop in whatever country you live. That is, and it's incorrect to say this, but to use a term that my listeners can understand, this is the shadow government of every country. They are the overseers of the visible government, which has no authority whatsoever unless it obeys the shadow government. This isn't hard to understand. It may be hard to believe because it's never been taught in your church. It's never been told to you by the government. It's never been a subject of discussion in your schools. It's just not talked about. Why? Because if the people understood this, there would be protest. And Rome hates to be protested. This is the very reason why it is essential that if you wish to maintain your Protestant liberties, you might call them constitutional liberties, but they're not constitutional at all. They're Protestant liberties. They may be reflected in some clumsy way in the Constitution, but those are Protestant liberties. We wouldn't have any of the liberties that we enjoy today were it not for the Protestant Reformation. That's just a concrete fact. There was never any sort of these liberties prior to the Protestant Reformation. A man was an abject slave during the Old World Order, and that's exactly what Rome is trying to establish once again in Protestant Great Britain, the Old World Order. Isn't it funny they use the same terms today, only they call it the New World Order? What are they implying when they use the term New World Order? Well, because it's overthrowing the Protestant Reformation, which has been the dominant philosophy, if you want to use that term, of all the governments since the 16th century. And it's not new at all. The New World Order is simply the restoration of the Old World Order. It's not a coincidence at all that George H.W. Bush used the term New World Order. In doing so, he was simply acknowledging the Old World Order, a system of laws that would bind all the countries together. That's what he was promoting. He didn't bother to tell you that it was Roman Catholic canon law, but nobody thought to ask him. His speech was not even hardly cloaked at all when you get right down to it. The New World Order is simply the reestablishment of the Old World Order. George H.W. Bush was a Knight of Malta. He'd sworn an oath to protect the papacy and to elevate the papacy to global supremacy. George H.W. Bush was never concerned at all about protecting the sovereignty of this nation. He was all about overthrowing the sovereignty of this nation and using this nation as a papal proxy warrior to help conquer the rest of the world for the papacy, as was decided at Vatican Council II. I hope my listeners are getting a clue. We'll be right back after these messages. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, you're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to support the program, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors it. And we thanks once again to Nicholas and First Amendment Radio for hosting the program. And if you'd like to contact me, please do so by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. And I'm always thrilled to the marrow of my bones to receive an email from somebody who's getting it. And blessed be to God. And it's just a wonderful thing to hear someone who is fully comprehending what we're talking about and beginning to do their own research into this matter. Now, we're talking about this papal bull and the new hierarchy, the new government that's taking over England. It says the bull went on to partition England into territorial dioceses. Okay, England was broken up into papal dioceses. This is the power structure of the Pope. This is how the Pope's power is extended into every nation. Listen, let me just make sure everybody understands this. To the degree that your country is marked out in dioceses, you have surrendered your sovereignty. Let me repeat that. To the degree that your nation, your state, is marked out in Roman Catholic dioceses, over which a bishop is the governor, a Roman Catholic bishop is the governor, you have surrendered your sovereignty. You see, in a Roman Catholic diocese, you don't get to vote. The bishop is the hierarch. It's not a democratic society. It's a papal society. It's a top-down government. The bishop speaks, the people respond. And if that bishop takes control over the civil government, which in effect it does by its very nature, then it's a top-down government. It controls the civil government. That's why your government seems so unresponsive. It seems so tyrannical. It seems not concerned about your rights at all. You just conform to the law. That's why the law uses armor-plated personnel carriers now to pay their visits to the citizens. That's why they use German shepherds, vicious German shepherds. You're going to comply or we're going to rip you to shreds. Okay? It's no longer a democratic government. It's papal tyranny. You see it every day on the news. You never comprehend what's really going on in the country, but now it all makes sense, doesn't it? All right? To the degree that your country is marked out in Roman Catholic dioceses, which in this case involves all of England, and in our case involves every square inch of this country, you have surrendered your national sovereignty. And no one ever tells you this, do they? Well, I'm telling you. They rule this country lock, stock, and barrel. And if you are a Protestant, an outspoken Protestant, and you're telling the people the truth about this shadow government, that it's no shadow at all, that the civil government is the shadow government and the Roman Catholic dioceses are the real, hard, visible government, and you begin to protest about it, the local bishop in your diocese put the hit out on you, and you all of a sudden have trouble buying things. You'll all of a sudden have trouble getting a job. You'll all of a sudden have trouble everywhere you turn. They have ways to silence the Protestant voice in this country, and I know it because I've felt the pressure from it. And they only tolerate me because yet they have to. But the time is coming in this country where they will no longer tolerate a protest against their divine government. So, it says the bull went on to partition England into territorial dioceses and to appoint bishops in each with jurisdiction. Okay? That's a governorship, a legal governorship, a ruling dictator. Okay? He is the supreme authority in that location, the bishopric, the diocese. He tells the civil government what it shall do. And if the bishop wants a certain law passed that forces the people in his jurisdiction to conform to Roman Catholic canon law, that law is written and then legislated upon and then passed in the parliament or in the government, whether it's local government, whether it's county government, whether it's state government, whether it's federal government. That's the function of the shadow government. That's the function of the diocese in every country. Now it says talking about this jurisdiction, it says the full and complete jurisdiction of the Roman Church. That's what we're talking about. The full and complete jurisdiction, not a partial jurisdiction, a complete and total jurisdiction of the Roman Catholic Church. The same which she exercises in most Catholic countries. So when your country is laid out in dioceses, headed up by bishops in each and every one of them, that's the degree to which you can consider your country a Catholic country. Now, you can call yourself a Protestant, you can call yourself chicken soup, but you live under a Catholic government. And you conform to Catholic law. The civil laws are made to conform to canon law. They are made to conform you into the image of the beast in Rome. Does that make sense? With or without your knowledge. And better that you don't have this knowledge, because you won't likely protest. You're too busy with the common everyday affairs of life. And you just mildly suffer this tyranny because you don't want your life disrupted, because you know if you stand up against this, you're going to be resisted. Rome's not going to be challenged. The federal government, the local government, even your local city council is not going to be challenged. They are under a divine authority, so they believe. And that's why even your local city council seem to be unavailable and unwilling to hear your grievances and unwilling to act to preserve any personal rights. If you have a grievance with your local city council, it might do you well to check to see how many Roman Catholics sit on it. Likewise, right even down to your parks commissioner. All right? They will not take dissension. You will conform. We don't want to hear your complaints. You just do as you're told. There's the Roman Catholic hierarchy taking its visible presence in the community, and no one seems to know where this irresponsible behavior comes from. Well, now you know. It says, quote, "In the sacred government of the clergy and people," said the bull, "and in all that which concerns the pastoral office, the archbishops and the bishops of England will enjoy all the rights and faculties which bishops and archbishops can use according to the disposition of the sacred canons," and that is canon law, "and the apostolic constitutions." Now, without going into detail to explain all this stuff, it just simply means they are under the authority of the Pope, and just like the Pope, they answer to no man. That's what it means. Roman Catholic canon law and the apostolic constitutions lay all of this out. They are completely irresponsible. Now, I'm not using that in the normal sense. I'm saying the word irresponsible, which means they are responsible to no one but the Pope. And anyone who lives in a diocese is responsible to no one but the bishop. The bishop is the ultimate authority in every papal jurisdiction. Civil authority be damned. Sorry, but that's just the way it is. That's the way Rome sees it, and to the degree that your government does not resist that, it is the government. Do you see anybody in Washington, D.C. protesting these archbishoprics and these bishoprics and the authority of the priests? No, they dine with them. Okay, the Roman Catholic Church hosts political campaigns. Now you beginning to get a picture? Why do you think every politician likes to have his picture taken with the local bishop? It's the slave and slave master represented in the form of photography. They're not even trying to hide it. All right. It says the government now set up was declared to be, quote, such as it freely exists in other nations, unquote. Okay? It not only exists, but it freely exists. No opposition. If you oppose it, you are ipso facto excommunicated. You are no count. You're not to be listened to. That's how hierarchical government works. That's how Roman Catholic canon law works. That's how the papacy works. You will submit to your superiors. And who are the superiors in the Roman Catholic Church? Those who are under apostolic authority. Those who are under the apostle in Rome. Peter in the flesh, the rock and foundation of the church. It just smacks of blasphemy from top to bottom. That's why it's an outrage that anybody in this country would remain silent about this. But how could you raise a protest if nobody educates you? You can't count on the government to educate you. You can't now count on your Protestant church to educate you. They've surrendered at Vatican Council II. They have no responsibility. They've abandoned Christ for Antichrist. Are you beginning to get some understanding of just how apostate this nation is? It could hardly be called a Christian nation. You might legitimately call it a Catholic nation, but you certainly cannot call this country a Christian nation. Oh, yes, there are lots of Bible-believing Christians in this country, but they've all been lulled to sleep. They don't even know who the enemy is. I was one of them. Look, if I seem derogatory or critical of my listeners, I'm placing myself in the same boat. I spent the majority of my life being just as stupid as everybody else. I make no apology for myself. No apology whatsoever. But it's time for me to get a grip. It's time for me to get a clue. And to the degree that I have a grip and I have a clue, it's my God-given responsibility to help you comprehend this. Even if it costs me my life. You know, I've already lost my country. What else have I got to lose? I realize now that I'm an abject slave, a subject of the Roman pontiff, and no one ever told me. I didn't have a choice in the matter. I am deeply offended by my government, deeply offended by my church and my pastors, deeply offended by my school system, deeply offended by every institution in this country that is actively, whether knowingly or not, assisted the secret that is kept from all American people, that the Pope is the God of this country. And I don't intend to remain silent about it any longer. I owe it to Christ to expose Antichrist in this country and everywhere else in the world. It says the government now set up. The Roman Catholic government, the diocesan government of the Pope, now set up, was declared to be, quote, such as it exists, freely exists in other nations, unquote. In other words, without opposition. You can't oppose this government because it's a divine government. And the civil government has nothing to do but to obey it. That's its reasonable service, to obey the Pope. Is that what the Bible says? No, not at all. Quite the contrary. It says the government now set up was declared to be such as it exists, freely exists in the other nations, and added the Pope in conclusion, quote, we likewise decree that all which may be done to the contrary by anyone, whoever he may be, knowingly or ignorantly, in the name of any authority whatsoever, shall be without force, unquote. So if you're a British citizen, you cannot oppose. Any opposition is without force. You best just keep your mouth shut. Now do you see what papal tyranny is? Now do you see what arrogance papal tyranny is? This is Protestant England. A country that whose blood was shed to defend herself against papal tyranny, now just flung open the doors for papal tyranny. And the Pope responded. He gave them the tyranny that they bargained for, and he said, if you resist, you're not to be no attention paid to you. All of the opposition is simply without force. Why, you do just as well to protest against heaven as to protest against the Pope, because he is God on earth. Now do you understand papal tyranny? He says, so far, or so much for the edict from the Flaminian Gate. That's the sum total of it. James A. Wiley has laid it out for you in terms that you cannot misunderstand. The God in Rome has spoken. Protestant England no longer exists. And just that easy. Now he says, we do not possess the gift of infallible interpretation. It's equally undeniable that Cardinal Wiseman does. Therefore, instead of offering any opinion of our own, let us hear what the Cardinal on this great edict of annexation. Here at least he cannot err. He was present when infallibility took counsel in this matter. He knows its secret purposes, which are hidden from ordinary mortals, and he is entitled to all credit when he interprets the mind of the pontiff as embodied in this bull. A quote-unquote pastoral letter from, quote, Nicholas by the divine mercy of the Holy Roman Catholic Church Cardinal Priest, Archbishop of Westminster, and Administrator Apostolic of the Diocese of Southwark, unquote, instantly followed the promulgation of the pontifical bull. Quote, we govern, unquote, quoth Nicholas of the Holy Roman Church, quote, and shall continue to govern the counties of Middlesex, Hertford, and Essex as ordinary thereof, and those of Surrey, Sussex, Kent, and Berkshire, and Hampshire, with the islands annexed as administrator with ordinary jurisdiction, unquote. Now, is there any way that any of this can be misunderstood? He says, we govern. We govern. Not the Queen, not the Parliament, not the people. We govern. He says, let us mark the words of quote-unquote Nicholas, that is a euphemistic name he's given to this cardinal, this pompous, arrogant, Roman Catholic minister of Satan himself. Let us mark the words of Nicholas, not spoken at random, but spoken in the full foresight that they would be carefully weighed and narrowly criticized. That's right. The legitimate government is going to pore over this bull with a fine-tooth comb to understand fully what it means. And therefore, we may be sure, selected because they were the terms of all others best fitted to announce the fact of his assumed jurisdiction without appearing unnecessarily to insult our independence or ignore our rights. Now, this confirms what I said before. To get the message across to the legitimate government exactly what this bull means without offending anyone unnecessarily. In other words, without offending the little people. This bull was written for the government of England. It was to be understood clearly by the government of England and everybody else. The little people of England were to remain clueless. That's what papal bulls are designed to do. That's what papal encyclicals and pastoral letters are designed to do. They are to speak volumes to the Pope's hierarchy, to the cardinals, the archbishops, and the bishops, and the priests, and especially the government, and leave everybody else clueless. Because we just don't read things, and we don't read carefully, and we certainly are never reading such works as these with understanding, because we're denied the understanding. Okay? So if you try to read a papal bull by yourself without somebody standing over your shoulder and informing you what certain terms mean, you're going to come away with a completely different understanding of the bull than what was purposely meant in the bull. Now, we here at Inquisition Update do our best and rely on the best sources. I regard Richard Bennett, a former Roman Catholic priest, to be the best one qualified to interpret these papal bulls and encyclicals. And when he is available, I bring him on the program and let him do his thing, because he is marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. Richard Bennett from BereanBeacon.org. I highly recommend his website. Read everything on that website, BereanBeacon.org. His name is Richard Bennett, and he has recently moved, but I understand he's getting settled in now and getting back up on the step. Go to Richard Bennett's website, BereanBeacon.org, and read, educate yourself. Listen to his videos on YouTube, and avail yourself of every knowledge that Richard can impart to you. He will help you understand what we work so hard to explain here at Inquisition Update. He can do it from a professional point of view. He was a priest of the Roman Catholic Church for over 2 decades, marvelously saved and reformed by the Spirit of God and the written Word of God. And now he is fighting tooth and nail Rome by educating Catholics and Protestants alike about what Rome's machinations mean in these papal bulls and encyclicals. And he's just an invaluable source of information. All right. The papal bull was written in such a way as to communicate the necessary overthrow of the government, to be understood by the government, to be understood by his bishops and priests. The people were to be left completely ignorant. And it says, but cautious as the terms are, the fact stands out in unmistakable prominence. Quote, we govern, unquote, said the cardinal, not the members of the Roman Catholic Church in the countries of Middlesex, but the counties themselves. We govern, and shall continue to govern in these counties forever. The government's been overthrown. Now ask yourself, what happened in the United States at Vatican Council II in 1965, when the Protestants likewise surrendered? It ought to make the hair stand on the back of your neck, and it'll explain all the aggression this country has put forth across the world. We'll talk about it more next week on Inquisition Update. Thanks for listening.